Hello, everyone. My name is Julie McVeigh, and this is Unordinary Made Ordinary, where we talk about extraordinary experiences of everyday people. After today's interview, if you would like to continue the conversation of all things metaphysical, paranormal, and supernatural, feel free to join our private UMO group by clicking on the link in the video description. And today, our guest is Paul Aurand. Welcome.
Thank you. I look forward to having this conversation with you.
Me too. Me too. Lots to talk about. So if you wouldn't mind, Paul, could you just share a little bit about yourself, a little background?
Sure. I wasn't raised in a spiritual or religious and in energy healing. I read Raymond Moody's book, and somehow after Life After Life really woke something up in me, made me curious about there being something more to life than just the material world or physical body. And I became interested in this Japanese healing practice and went off to Japan in my early 20s to study it. Came back and practiced it. And that was a real foundation for me in a spiritual sense. And as I was doing that, but it was organized religion. Right. And in time, I struggled with some of the tenets and practices and couldn't really stay with that. But as I practiced that, I became interested in other kinds of healing work, Reiki, therapeutic touch, breath work, rebirthing, and in time, hypnosis. And hypnosis was something that I had a lot of misunderstanding about me and most everybody else, I think, about what it is and how it works. But in training with it and beginning to use it in my healing practice, it gave me a very specific way to help someone expand their consciousness. And I used that expanded state of consciousness to involve the person in their own healing and facilitating their own healing. And so I began to practice clinical hypnosis in a doctor's office that was specializing in patients with chronic pain and chronic illness. Most of the tools I had as I did that, it was about 5 years I did practice there, were really to anesthetize pain. It was really to try to deal with the symptoms as opposed to resolving the underlying problem. And I wasn't satisfied with the results I was seeing there. And so I started to take a sort of reverse approach, if you will, and instead of dissociating people, instead of anesthetizing their pain, I would work to help them focus on it and really enter into a relationship with it and dialogue with it, much as we're talking here. And it was surprising the information and the wisdom that their body would give them about lifestyle changes or the real cause of what it was they were struggling with, something beyond something I could offer them. And I loved that they found the answers within themselves rather than being given them from someone else. I found that much more trustworthy. And it was in the course of practicing this clinical hypnosis that two really major things happened. One was that some of the people I was working with to reduce pain were spontaneously regressing to things that they called past lives. And at first I was really surprised, curious, but surprised, and didn't really know how to facilitate it, couldn't put it in a box really. I didn't know exactly what was happening, but I saw that when this happened, that this pain they'd been struggling with, often for many years, was relieved. Somehow it solved their problem. And so I said to myself, I don't know if this is past life or fantasy or imagination or what it is, but 7 years of chronic pain relieved in one session when nothing else worked, I'll accept that, right? And then it happened a few more times and I said, no, there's got to be something to this. I need to really study and learn how to do this intentionally. And as I began that, then I think the most transformative thing that's ever occurred in my life happened. And that's when I was in my early 40s, I got hit by lightning.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And so I struggled for a long time after that. But I think the most important thing about that experience was the near-death experience that I had. And I was vaguely aware of some talk of it, especially after reading Moody's book, but it didn't mean a lot to me. But looking at my body that appeared to be immobilized, that wasn't responding to the paramedics, and being able to move away from that body, being conscious, even though my body wasn't, was really transformative. And my journey into spirit and the things that happened there are things I brought back with me that really changed how I practice as well as how I live my life. Give me a very different perspective on life and death and, well, what's really important in life.
When you had your near-death experience, that sounds pretty crazy, by the way, getting hit by lightning. Would you mind kind of walking us through that a little bit? Like what did, because some people will jump out of body, some people are taken right away into a waiting room or, you know, a tunnel, all kinds of things.
Yeah. So I intentionally regress people back to those times now. We've been doing a study with sudden cardiac arrest patients that were dead for various lengths of time and all resuscitated. And it's fantastic, the stories that they tell, including details that they could never know if they had been dead, about the procedures done or things people said. But yeah, so I was at a swim meet for my son, and the meet was outdoor swim meet, and the meet was postponed because of thunder in the distance. And I decided to take my youngest son and leave the swim meet, and it was standing by the car that at the time I didn't know it was lightning, but my whole world just exploded. Everything turned white and I was being electrocuted. I didn't know why, but as many near-death experiences will describe, time seems to slow down, right? And so here I am, 150 million volts of electricity going through my body and convulsing, going, oh, I'm being electrocuted. I have on rubber sandals, shouldn't be happening. I should be insulated. Where's it coming? I couldn't really look around. My body was pretty rigid. And I knew if it continued, I wouldn't survive. It was just, the pain was unbelievable.
Wow.
When it stopped, I actually flew. People saw I wear a baseball cap to protect my head. They saw it fly off my head like some kind of cartoon. And then I flew. And apparently many people are really injured when they're hit by lightning, not just by the electricity, but by being thrown. So I was thrown, landed on my head. And the next thing I know, I'm not sure how long it was. I'm guessing 10 minutes. I was in the street in water over a foot deep, huge storm. When it happened, it was sunny. It wasn't raining, but a huge storm came in, hail, wind, lightning everywhere. And they were trying to get me up out of the street, waiting for an ambulance to come. I was paralyzed on about half of my body. I couldn't walk or move. And I didn't know what happened. I really didn't know what happened. The next day, when I was released from the hospital, it was months of really short-term memory loss, a lot of physical pain, knowing something that had happened, but not knowing what. And I ran a center at that point and had someone coming in to present a workshop on somatic healing. It's a method of connecting with the body and releasing trauma. And he saw I was in rough shape, so he demonstrated on me in front of the class, which isn't something I would normally do, but I needed help. It was about 6 months after.
Wow.
And it was in that regression that all the details of leaving body and going back to what I call home came back. Now, some near-death experiencers go farther than I did. You know, something we've seen in our study is that, especially when they're resuscitated a few minutes after their heart stops, they don't necessarily go all the way, but they have an out-of-body experience. There are different degrees, really, of a near-death experience. Some at the beginning is out-of-body experience, which is what you were talking about. Most all of them reached something we call the threshold. They're greeted by a loved one.
Oh, I see.
And so often the loved one comes forward and says, no, it's not your time. You have to go back for your family. You have to go back for what it is they need to accomplish on earth or learn on earth, right? So I didn't find this threshold, but I did have a couple of really profound experiences. It had me do a kind of life review, and not in great detail, but I was shown all the people that I had done sessions for and felt the appreciation from them for what I'd done, right? That was tremendous, to just be overwhelmed by the appreciation for all those lives who I had touched in some way. And then I was put back into what I call universal sea of consciousness. I was given the experience of being one with all things. So it's a little hard to describe, but I had a sense of self, of my personal consciousness, but at the same time, no separation at all from anything, and actually feeling as though I was a part of all things. I think that an awareness of this could really make our world a different place. There's such division that we're experiencing, you know, beyond politics, beyond whatever. But there's such a movement of division around the world at this time that if we could reconnect with a knowing that we are all one, even with the earth, you know, it would influence in a very beneficial way how we behave, how we act, how we interact, right? I mean, I'm human, I have my judgmentalness, I have my prejudices, but I'm much less so because of this experience of oneness, right? It's easier to catch myself when I'm kind of going down that track. And the other thing I experienced there was complete and total unconditional love, something that I think we all long for, but don't often experience in our physical body and on planet Earth, right? And that love is transformational. That love is healing. That love, I still know it. It's not, some of these things like consciousness continuing, life after death, unconditional love, oneness, they're beautiful concepts and theories that people believe or don't believe. Mm-hmm. But when you experience it, it's pretty hard to not believe it, you know? So it's a knowing, it's an experience, as opposed to, well, I believe in reincarnation, or I believe in life after death. I experienced being alive after my body died, and I've seen it with other people. I don't fear death anymore. Dying, the dying part, sometimes that's not very pleasant, right? Mm. So I understand that, but the being dead part, it's a relief. It's freeing.
Yes.
Really, yeah. Long for it, but it isn't a tragedy. It's a beautiful thing. It's part of who we are and what we do. This is the impermanent part. That was a long answer to your question, sorry.
Oh no, it's everything that you're answering, things that I wanted to ask as you're sharing, so it's great. Wow, that must have been quite a session when that all came back to you. And now I gotta imagine that your whole idea of past lives then and how you treat patients, it kind of maybe you had more of a narrow focus now with your patients and their healing.
Mm-hmm. So I still do clinical work. It's so needed now after pandemic and and
True.
isolation, working with anxiety and depression. But my main focus with people is past life, but even beyond past life, doing between life. So it's the work that Michael Newton developed of taking someone from the death scene in their past life into spirit, where they're free of their body, and they meet their guides, loved ones, and explore things like why they came into this life, what they wanted to achieve, what lessons their soul's working on over lifetimes. And so that's called life between life regression. That's my main focus. And it's not the only way to do it, but it's a wonderful way to do it. And so I've practiced that, and I've developed a method where instead of, people are often looking outside themselves for answers. And I take people to meet their guides most every day. But what I like to do with someone is have them first go in and reconnect with their own inner wisdom and resolve some of the beliefs and some of the emotions that they carry, so they can once again connect, well, with inner child, but even beyond that, to the wise one within, back to make contact with their own soul essence, to reconnect with what it is that's living in this human body, that has experienced lifetimes and comes in with lifetimes of wisdom. And then once it's sort of incarnated, then has to deal with this mental mind and human personality, and it becomes difficult to reconnect with that inner strength and wisdom. And so that's my great love and focus in the daily sessions and courses that I do, is to help people reconnect with that, what I call soul essence, or their soul self.
Can people do that through meditation?
Absolutely. It's a guided meditation of sorts that I'll take someone through. And yes, the beauty of this is once you get through some of those crusty layers of protection and some of the trauma or wounds, and someone reconnects with this, once they've reconnected, it's much easier to, in meditation, do that on.
Do you find that people have more to work through from their childhood or growing up years, or more to work through past life traumas?
Yeah, good question. It really depends on the individual. My preference is to start with this life stuff, because I'm sort of known for past life and between life. People come and want that. But I know that it may be something else in this life that we have to deal with first. Because if there's a lot of pain and loss in this life, if there's a lot of trauma in this life, you can try to go to past life or try to connect with soul, but you're going to bump into that stuff. And so I'm not saying you need to spend years digging through it, but oftentimes you have to deal with some of the stuff that's happened in this life in order to get past it, to go into the past life and to reconnect with your soul self.
Now, working through this life and past lives, and working through these traumas and releasing them, would you say, I mean, clearly that would benefit this life, but does it benefit the in-between life and the future lives that you may reincarnate into?
Yes, yes. And for me, this is a fascinating thing, or something it took me time to understand. So we know that human being, our personality, that we carry emotions from the past, right? Happy, sad, angry, whatever it is, from our childhood, from our adolescence. Psychology especially looks at these times, right? And as it should. And then, so we carry these emotions. We have a reservoir of them within ourselves. In addition, we have beliefs. We form beliefs. It's my fault. I'm not good enough. The world's a scary place. And so as a result of the emotionally charged experiences we have, we form beliefs. And then those beliefs guide us, they limit us. We operate from that belief system in the world, right? There's not enough. That's a big one. There's not enough. I'm not enough. There isn't enough. There isn't enough money. There isn't enough love. There isn't enough. Whatever, there's not enough. And the third one, so you have stored emotions, you have beliefs, and the third one is survival strategy. It's what we learn to do, often as children, to stay safe and to get love and acceptance, because we all need that. But it's those survival strategies that really cause trouble in a person's life. Now, I learned if I was good, if I was the pleaser, if I tried to make other people happy, then maybe they would make me happy, right? It doesn't really work. But from limited resources, that was my attempt, right? And so we all have these. And I always saw that as a part of the personality of the human being. What I didn't realize until I had been doing this work for a while is that these very same things also exist in the soul consciousness, the consciousness that continues through lifetimes. We bring beliefs from previous lives. We bring survival strategies from previous lives into this life, right? I died in
Makes sense.
a mine in my past life. So the first time I tried to go in a cave, it was like, I don't think so, because something in me said, I didn't know what it was, right? So there are fears, there are limitations that we have in this life that come from previous lives. So past life regression is a good way to resolve that. And a really big thing, I think, is that it often at the death scene in the past life, how we die. And immediately after death, we look back at that life and go, well, I really got in trouble for opening my big mouth and telling the truth. They didn't like that. That didn't fit with their belief. They killed me for it. Right? And then the soul goes, next life, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. There's no way.
Right.
So on some level, the soul wants to speak truth, but because it came to a bad or painful end, there's a decision, a soul contract that says, I got hurt too much in that life. I'm not going to let anyone in, right? So it can happen in this life. My boyfriend, my girlfriend left. It broke my heart. I'm not going in relationship anymore. Souls carry this kind of stuff too. And you can't resolve it. No matter how much traditional psychotherapy you do, you can't go back very far. Even pre-verbal is difficult, right? To process.
Sure.
Maybe you can do newborn, but guess what? That soul coming into that body is bringing in not just wisdom and light, but bringing in some of the trauma, some of the limiting beliefs from previous lives as well.
So we can work through some of this, you say, in meditation, some of these limitations, belief. I mean, can we, not just meditation, but practice intention with ourselves during the day to decrease, eliminate, evaporate, diminish, the limiting beliefs? And can we revoke soul contracts? Can we do these things without necessarily pinpointing and living through our memories of what happened? Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. Yes, we can. And that's really what I'm working on, is not just helping people do that, but teaching people how to do that for themselves, right?
Oh, great.
So in my book, Essential Healing, there's 50 practices that are self-guided, right? And there's progression to them. So first is get out of your thinking mind, because when you have a problem or issue or a pattern or a belief, you've thought about it and tried to resolve it and did or didn't. And then there's moving into the heart to really not just live from the intellectual self, but more from the heart, which is closer, more closely connected to our authentic self. And often we carry armoring, protection over the heart. And so in meditation, you try to go in and you hit that brick wall that was built over years to keep you safe. And so working through that to get to the sweet heart that lies beneath it and release some of the stored emotions, right? Some of the pain that we carry, and ultimately reconnecting with the child self. And there's really two versions of the child self that we all have within us. There's the wounded child, the one that has some hurt, some pain, some trauma that needs some love and attention and care. But we all have what I call wonder child. There's the original playful, spontaneous, woohoo, curious child.
Yeah.
You bring something to this conversation. I think that makes it easy for the person you're talking with, because there is a certain, I don't know, playfulness or acceptance or curiosity that you have in you. And so it's helping people reconnect with that. And once you do some healing with the child self and reconnect with it, there are other parts of our psyche, our personality, that will come forward that we can begin to work with. And this is where, if we have a little higher perspective from the work we're doing ourselves, we can look at our response to things and start to recognize, oh, I really have a very active inner critic, this inner voice that says, you should have done that right. Oh, you could have done that better, right? So there are a few significant parts I like to have people work with. And so inner critic is one. Wise one within is another one. Inner child is another one. I'm blanking. Anyway, to work with these parts and get them to work in harmony and find different strategies for how they do their job is so very, very important. Yeah.
You just made me think of something, it would be great if I could treat myself like I treat my kids, with all the positive reinforcement and always looking at the best and encouraging. And I think, you just made me think of that. Oh, it's too bad I don't do that all the time as much for myself. It would be good if I did. I do have a kind of a tough question. My listeners are very curious about reincarnation, of course. And one of the things many want to do is get off the reincarnation cycle and wheel and move on, or graduate, so to speak. So would you say that some of these techniques that you're talking about, 50 techniques, boy, I didn't realize you had that many in there in the book, it is a way of helping us, our current soul, grow, and maybe we will not be needing to come back and incarnate on Earth?
Absolutely. I think that's one of our goals. Unfortunately, once we leave our body and return home and are in a higher state of consciousness and more free of the earthly suffering, there's often something in us that says, no, I really want to go back and have this experience, or I really want to go back and help, because they really need help on Earth right now. Look what they're doing. I want to go back there and help. Yeah. And so one of my goals or intentions, especially with someone that says, I just don't want to be here. I don't understand how this world works or how society works. It's too painful. It's too confusing. I just want to finish this life as best I can and never have to come back. Mm-hmm. It's that individual that I'd like to get into a more expanded state of consciousness, into spirit with their guides, and back into their own original soul consciousness, to help them regain an understanding of why they're here in the first place, why they did this. It's not a joke, and it's not pointless, right? There's some intention that they've come with. And even if life is difficult, if you know clearly why you're here, it makes it easier to live it, And that's really my goal or intention, is to make it easier to live what you came to do. And if that means getting it all done so you don't have to come back, fine. That's not my choice, but that's not up to me. That's between you and your guide. And my understanding is that some choose not to come back, some choose not to come back for a long time. Some choose to go other places. This is not the only place that people are incarnating.
That was one of my questions. So there are other planets, or are they all physical places we incarnate? I guess you wouldn't say we incarnate into a non-physical place, right? So so there's other physical places to incarnate on, and
there are other physical places, there are other dimensions where it isn't a physical incarnation per se, it's more consciousness or kind of a fluid consciousness that people will describe. Yeah. Here I am trying to regress someone back to their life in medieval times, and they're describing something that looks like a praying mantis, but not really in a physical body and radiating love. And it's like, okay, but yeah, there are other forms of life than human beings, that's for sure. We're not only living things. And it's often one who hasn't incarnated very frequently on Earth that can have difficulty here, both with health, with operating the physical body, as well as operating on Earth, human Earth terms.
Well, that's interesting. I haven't heard that. So if you've had more incarnations, you might have an easier time adjusting, acclimating to this strange 3D Earth planet, but the fewer, you may have a little bit of a harder time. Oh, okay.
That's right.
Interesting.
Imagine you come from a planet of unconditional love, and you come here and see what's happening. It's painful, and you don't understand. I mean, kids will talk about this, until it's kind of socialized out of them, but some kids will talk about this. It's really hard for them.
So are you saying some children are more in touch with their previous life, and they have they talk about it more freely than adults?
Yeah, until they realize they shouldn't talk about it, or they're made fun of for it. Up until about the age 7, there's often clarity or memories from past life. There's actually a group at the University of Virginia, Department of Perceptual Studies, that was started by Ian Stevenson, and then carried on by others. And they have at least 40 or 50 years of research, documented research, on children's past life memories, right? I met one of them. I went down and worked with some of the people at Department of Perceptual Studies, and I met one of the young kids that told this fantastic story about being on the front of a ship. And now he was verbal, but young, but he didn't have the language. So he described what we would call a block and tackle system. He described ropes going through these round wheels, right? That was used to pull in whales. It was a whaling ship he was describing. Now, he had no knowledge of this, and he talked about a harpoon and how to make one. I mean, not a practice we want to promote this day and age, but he had this experience, and he described it to perfect detail, right? That's just a minimal piece of research. They have so much more. It's really fascinating. But as happens with people who have near-death experiences, someone will say, "Oh, you're crazy," or "Don't talk about that," or "I don't believe that." And the kids get that message too, and as they become more socialized and more fully incarnated, fully in the body, then they lose touch with the past life stuff. But if you ask them early, they'll often tell you something.
Do you have any theories as to why we don't bring any, sometimes none? I don't have any past life memories. Generally, most people don't. Do you know why we I mean, as a child, you have some of them, it sounds like, but we grow out of it. And why aren't we allowed to have these memories continue?
Yeah, it's a good question, but I don't have the answer, and it really makes me mad. It's what it leaves. I suppose, I mean, understand the theory that it would be too confusing for us, but the fact that we have all this times, we come into our body and forget it all, we get this amnesia, right?
Oh, you,
Remember, it doesn't seem, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
oh, you went out for a second when after you said amnesia.
Yeah, because I probably shouldn't talk about it. um, we
Oh,
get the amnesia, right? We get amnesia, and then we spend a lifetime trying to remember it. Yeah, it seems nonsensical to me. If someone has an answer for that, I'd like it, because it obviously that one bothers me.
I mean, we don't have to remember every single detail, but at least little chunks to go, oh yeah, I remember I had a life as this. I mean, I guess it could be confusing if you have all these memories of all your spouses and all your kids,
Yeah.
but at least maybe little bits of memory like, oh yeah, that seems harmless, but
Right. That it's becoming easier to access it. I think the veil is thinning. When I started this in the 80s, it seemed much more difficult to access it. When Michael Newton was developing the twin life work, he really had to work at it, and not everyone was capable of it. I would say now it's much easier to get there than it was. I think it's more accessible. Yeah, but yes, I think you're right. If we remembered everything, it would be way too confusing, because if you think about who's in your life now and having been with them before, they can be in very different relationship. Gender can be different, and relationship can be different. So if your daughter is your father in your past life, then how do you relate to her in this life? That gets messy. So to that degree, I say, okay, we need some amnesia, but
why do you think the world is becoming more conscious? Why is there a thinning of the
yeah,
veil?
I think if we don't, we're going to find our demise. But I think that we are working in many ways to raise our consciousness. I think there's a theme or a goal, and there are many things on this planet to distract us from that. But I really think that that's essentially what we're doing here, is to expand our consciousness and operate from a higher level of consciousness, not just be a human being living a materialistic life.
Have you met or regressed anyone who's had only one life here? They're on their first life? Or, and I am curious about some of the other ones that, what other descriptions, what are their lives? Like ETs, I guess?
Absolutely. Sometimes regressing someone back to a past life, they go back to a time where they're not on planet Earth in a very different physical form. I guess the two funniest or most curious or interesting regressions like that, I had someone who had not incarnated many times on Earth, and well, her appearance was very important to her. Her hair, makeup, jewelry, finger, everything was, and she regressed back to Cro-Magnon, back to pre-language, right? So she grunted through the session rather than being able to respond really verbally, and was terribly horrified by the fact that she had very hairy and gnarly feet back then as this kind of caveman. I had a young man that I regressed. He was 16, and I regressed him back to his most recent life, where he died of a drug overdose at Woodstock, at the festival. And I said, well, wait a minute, that's his past life, but I was alive.
That's weird.
I talked to Michael Newton about it. He says, yeah, the first time I had one of those, I knew it was time for me to retire.
Oh my gosh.
Oh.
Wow. That's pretty fast. That's another question. How long do we get to hang out in the in-between life stage? Or do we have to snap back into another life?
It takes time. Now, in his case, he came back very quickly, you're right. But that's because he died accidentally. He didn't intend to die.
Oh.
And he died. And he really regretted it. And so he said to his guide, I want to go right back and do it right. And that's really why he came into me. He had, I mean, his friends sat with him. He was so determined to leading group meditations and all kinds of things. You know, he was, well, they were doing stuff that normal 16-year-olds do. So they really had enough of him. And he said, this is really difficult for me. I don't know why I'm so intent on this. And that's why, because he was trying to make up for this life that was short and didn't feel he accomplished much. So a soul that dies without accomplishing much in a previous life, either because of suicide or war or some accident, will often come back very quickly. Whereas a soul that has really struggled or worked really hard and is kind of weary will often stay in spirit longer for rejuvenation, for some healing, and to kind of, well, regroup before they come back. Yeah.
Do the guides that we have they had Earth? Is it a requirement for them to have had an Earth life or not necessarily?
Usually they don't incarnate anymore. Yeah. So they can relate to it, but some things they're a little, they don't seem to relate so much to time, Earth time, linear time, and they don't seem to relate too much to finances, to money. They'll tell people like, oh, don't worry, someone can't pay their rent, right? They're struggling. And they come in for a session and they'll say, oh, there's great abundance in the universe. You don't have to worry about money. And the person's like, yeah, but I have to pay my rent, And so, yes, it's true on the big picture that there is abundance and our consciousness influences that. But some of the practicalities, they're not so in touch with. The guides aren't. But yeah, so they don't incarnate anymore. Most of them have incarnated. Yeah.
Do they not incarnate anywhere? Not just the planet Earth, but they don't incarnate anywhere. They just hang out as a guide?
Yeah. Yeah. Unless there's something unusual or really urgent. I've had a few cases where a guide came and incarnated just because of some special circumstance, but that's unusual.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm also wondering what if you know anything more about the afterlife, what is it like over there? Is it like physical reality here? Is it completely different? Do we, because I've heard that you can hang out at a home that you can create on the lake, hang out with your kids who have passed over, or those who astral travel. I've heard of that as well. They can go over and I don't know if you know much about that. What can you share?
Mm-hmm. So it depends on the individual's consciousness. So when I take someone into spirit through a regression, their ineffable experience, their experience that's really undescribable, is filtering through from soul state into subconscious mind and then into conscious mind. And they're translating their experience there into human words that their human mind can relate to. So Michael Newton looked at this a lot, and he saw consistencies, right? In over 7,000 cases that he researched. And so people would often talk about this kind of domed building that a group that they called their council. These wise elders would often be in this domed building. And they would offer deep wisdom about the soul's progress and life choices. So when I ask a client who describes this dome building, they'll say, oh, it has pillars and steps that look like granite. There aren't pillars and granite steps on the other side. There aren't. There appear to be, or that if I ask them, well, go closer and describe it to me, and they'll say, well, those columns aren't really columns. They're more like light that's vibrating with the sound and energy, right? So it's things that are familiar to us, that are relatable to us. Yeah. And I think that when we first return, it's important that it's familiar, right? So when I was first regressed and taken into back into spirit, there was this beautiful scene, this pastoral scene. I mean, it was like out of Hollywood. There's ivy, there's a fountain, there's a meadow, and I'm like, yeah, all we need now is Meryl Streep or something to make this perfect. And my guide, who was pretty funny, often the guides are very funny. They tell us to lighten up and don't be so serious. And he kind of goes, whoom, waves his arm. And this whole pastoral scene is now desert. And I'm like, and he says, well, you like desert, don't you? And I do. I really, it opens my heart. I love the desert. And he said, this is really for your comfort. It can appear however you need it to be. There was a Robin Williams, another one that went home too soon. Robin Williams movie,
What Dreams May Come, yeah.
Yeah, it was a beautiful depiction, I think, both of depression,
yeah,
but also of spirit and consciousness, right? So when someone is more comfortable there in spirit, there's less construct. So people will experience guides, sometimes religious beings or a relative or some wise human being, but a human form, beard or some staff or cane or hat, things that are symbolic of wisdom and this sort of thing. But as one evolves, as one's consciousness is more expanded, there's much less of this construct. There's much less of this personification of these things. It's more, people talk about, oh, there's this warm, unconditionally loving energy that's communicating non-verbally to me, right? So I would say that's becoming more common from what I'm hearing from other facilitators. And I think that as the individual who's returned into spirit needs those kind of relatable things from planet Earth, then they experience something more like the vastness of the universe.
Okay.
It's formless light and love kind of things.
That makes sense. That makes sense. We are getting up on time, unfortunately, and I would love to hear about any current projects you're working on, and please share how the listeners can connect with you. And remind me again the name of your book as well.
It's called Essential Healing.
And when did you finish that? When was that published?
In June. It's just a year now.
Just a year. Okay.
We just had the Spanish edition was released in Spain in May and in Latin America this month.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, and again, it's really a self-help book with I took all the years of therapy I've done for people and did my best to systematize it or put it in some order and in practices that I found myself doing with many people. So that you can do it for yourself. So that's in all books on Amazon. It's in bookstores. So that's one. The other is I do individual sessions based on that, and I do trainings as well. The next ones we have on the calendar are September and October. That's a hypnotherapy training and past life regression training that then leads on to the between life regression therapy. And some people take it for their own personal growth, and some take it because they want to practice it. And people can reach me at paul@paulaurand.com. And my website is paulaurand.com.
paulaurand.com. Oh, okay, perfect. And what I like to do also, Paul, is leave my guest with the last words. Just anything that's on your heart, or words of encouragement, or something you thought, oh, we didn't cover this one thing that I really wanted to cover.
I want to go back to something you said about your children. And I just want to say, love yourself as much as you love others.
Hard to do sometimes.
Yeah, me too.
For some reason.
That's what we're talking. Yeah, me too. Thanks so much for today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. So helpful. So much great information. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone watching. This has been Julie McVeigh with Unordinary Made Ordinary. And I hope you'll join us next time for another interesting interview. And if you did like this, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like this type of content that we're sharing on the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so you are alerted to future interviews. And I do hope you're all having a fantastic day or evening, wherever you are on the planet or off the planet. And we will see you all next time. Bye.